forbidden and banned, the bane of bureaucrats, exposing mainstream media's weapons of mass distraction.
Flying under the radar and dropping truth bombs on tyranny.
It's Liberty Now. Kia ora, hello and welcome to Liberty Now, fighting globalism and exposing corruption. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm your host, John Verd, trainer, piper, Navy diver, and Liberty lover. This is the podcast for discerning minds and common sense. We seek the truth and we can think for ourselves. Please be sure to hit subscribe on your favorite podcast player app. And if you don't have time to listen to the full episode, just get the highlights, links, and show notes for this episode at libertynow.com. All right, today my guest is José Niño, a freelance writer based in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's published and authored some works that have been featured in the Mises Institute, which I was very impressed with, Big League Politics, and even cited by Senator Rand Paul. José is a popular commentator on the topics of foreign policy, cryptocurrency, immigration, and gun rights. And he's got his own podcast, El Niño Speaks, which you should definitely check out. José, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on, John. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I appreciate your time. Before we get into our interview today, I thought we'd talk about something. Today there's even more recent news, but first about the recent SCOTUS decision. I wanted to quote Trump, where he said, "This morning, the Supreme Court has delivered a monumental victory for the Constitution, the separation of powers, and the rule of law in striking down the excessive use of nationwide injunctions to interfere with the normal functioning of the executive branch." What do you think about that, José?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Trump about that because, if you let unelected judges rule from the bench, you have what's called a critarchy, which is literally means rule by judges. And that destroys any form of democratic Republican governance that we were supposed to have. And it effectively erases the will of the voters. And it is like, as you mentioned in your show description, it is the ultimate tool of globalism because it erases the very idea of having a politician that is accountable to a constituency that is subject to the pressure of the voters or grassroots interest groups at the polls. But when you're able to let the courts have this type of power in terms of preventing Trump from governing, or any politician for that matter from governing, or implementing policy by judicial fiat, your system now ceases to be like a republic, much less a democracy. And I think it's good that that decision was made, because if we continue this route, we're just gonna have an oligarchical tyranny within time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And for the less educated people that just don't follow or pay attention to our Constitution or politics in general in the U.S. and for those abroad who may not be as familiar with how a republic works, the founding fathers of America were genius in the way they set up the system that we have. It is a sorry, I got the dog back there. Our founders set up a brilliant system of three co-equal branches of government. We have the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. So it's Congress, the president, and the Supreme Court. And it's kind of a tiebreaker system, so that, as you said earlier, the will of the people is implemented, and not just one branch that wants to dictate everything. And that's essentially what has been going on the last few administrations, probably the last couple decades, is with these activist judges. They're supposed to be unbiased and impartial, and yet if they oppose the president, and especially this particular president, and they are partisan, or in their injunctions and what they're doing. They're effectively trying to judicially stop the power of the president, which he does have, and the Congress as well. So I think this is a major victory, and I think it's really important for the will of the people. Again, I know that many on the left, because they hate Trump, they just disagree with anything that might benefit him. But in reality, that's what the majority of the American public wants.
Even the left, if we're being brutally honest, should actually applaud this decision, because
Yes.
a lot of the stuff they push for, whether it's like checking corporate power and whatnot, I think would actually consolidate if judges are allowed to legislate from the bench, because the Supreme Court is like as pro corporate of an institution as possible. And especially for like leftists too that believe in like direct democracy and all of that, just like supporting a really activist court basically means that the local referendums they support, like at the state or local level, could get nullified by a federal or even like Supreme Court judge, depending on the political context. So it's insanely short-sighted for neoliberal globalists like Clinton-style Democrats. Like they obviously want an activist court, because that's like one step towards creating a kind of like one world government or some like supranational governing entity that's no longer accountable to voters. But there's a lot of people that have like Trump derangement syndrome and don't get like the bigger picture that regardless of who's in like the presidency, like I don't want an activist court, period. And in fact, going back to some of your points about the founding fathers, if you listen to the debates with regards to the judiciary among like especially the anti-federalists and people like of that set, they generally were even skeptical of having like a really strong court system. They still wanted they wanted to have like three branches, but the Supreme Court was never envisioned to be like a this like quasi legislative body that we have now. It was almost supposed to be like an advisory body. And the whole concept of judicial review, for people who forget this, like the Marbury versus Madison decision, where like the Supreme Court could declare that like a certain law is like unconstitutional, was even heavily debated in the early days of the Republic. A lot of the founding fathers, once they were in government, they were actually skeptical of this concept of judicial review, and they generally wanted to have, if anything, a stronger legislative branch to check executive power, as opposed to having like a judiciary that was effectively like a lifetime appointment for a small clique of people to shape public policy.
Right. Well, and it's kind of the idea why we have term limits too. We need to refresh those legislative bodies and in all branches, and because we can get a sort of a sclerosis or a hardening of opinion, and the will of the people will not be carried out. So I think it's a brilliant decision, and it will have an impact on a couple of things that have been couple contentious issues. One is ruling on LGBTQ indoctrination. Now that's going to raise the hackles of a lot of people, when you label it indoctrination. But the left really need to understand that you can't legislate morality. Whatever you think is, right and proper, left or right, you have to leave it up to the people. And there's also an age of consent, with regard to LGBTQ quote unquote education or books, being given to kids, who are minors, who aren't even able to make decisions for themselves, who are, let's remind people, until you're 18, you're not allowed to buy cigarettes until you're 21 in the United States. You're not allowed to buy alcohol. You can't get tattoos. You can't go to war. And yet it's okay in the left mentality mindset that you could be, even I've heard people say that as young, when their child was first born, they just somehow knew that their child was transgender, which is impossible. It's just ridiculous. And to make a life-changing decision for that kid, to have them immediately being put on hormones by the time they're in, grade school or something, or indoctrinating these kids with ideas before they have any sexual maturity or ability to form their own opinions while as their bodies are changing. That doesn't happen until much later into your teens. And yet somehow they want to be able to take away parental rights in those decisions and give them the ability to commit to, life-changing, life-altering surgeries that can never be repaired. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I generally oppose like the cultural left's pro degeneracy agenda. It's all part of a plot to like this of really a plan to just destroy basic sexual and gender norms and just destabilize society in general and get people to basically turn against their family, their parents, and it leads to a dysfunctional, atomized society from that point, which is very easy to exploit and rule over for tyrants. Because historically speaking, like the family structure and like family units have been a check against tyrannical overreach, and that's one reason why all manner of like leftist movements, they always try to undermine the family unit in one way or the other. And I think this was a correct call.
Yeah, you exactly nailed it. And this is what I try to get across to people in, on this show, in my personal conversations with people, is step away and look at the bigger picture. We get caught in the quagmire and the mud of like, who's right, you're transphobic or whatever. In the bigger picture, you realize that you are generating more and more people in a society who will not be able to reproduce. You're mutilating them genetically or physically,
Yeah.
so that their reproductive organs are no longer functional. So, and what is the globalists' biggest quote unquote concern is overpopulation, right? They're afraid of competition, too many of us versus them. And it is exactly as you say, in the bigger picture, it's about control, atomizing society, getting us fighting about something that doesn't matter, and all the meanwhile reducing our population and getting us under their thumb. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right on target about that. So this is a great decision. I think that giving the rights back to parents, letting them decide in the schools, and allowing them to discuss openly in forums and in schools without being arrested for somehow interfering with their agenda, as we've seen. Moving on to the other contentious issue about birthright citizenship. How do you think this decision will affect that, and how do you see it playing out?
Yeah, this is particularly big because I'm big on immigration restriction of both legal and illegal immigration, and I think it's a good call. The big problem is long term. U.S. is gonna have to eventually legislate on like passing a measure to actually like repeal birthright citizenship altogether, or at least get like a favorable court ruling that declares that birthright citizenship as it's constructed is unconstitutional and doesn't really exist. Because
Right.
mass migration, I do think it does pose an existential threat to the US, because this is also part of like the globalist agenda where
Yes.
they're just going to import just millions of people both legally and illegally to demographically transform the US and turn it into a Tower of Babel that is just like incoherent and very
Right.
easy to exploit as well, because when you import a ton of people uncontrollably for like decades on end, you're going to have a ton of alien cultures interacting with each other, and it's going to create ethnic, religious, and other forms of sectarian tension. And if you see where I'm going with this, it creates the
Yeah.
perfect divide and rule scenario to
Yeah.
where the country gets destabilized, but you'll still have an oligarchical elite that will rest easy knowing that everybody else will be fighting over, I don't know, whatever outrage of the day is kicking off, or even sometimes just
Right.
flat out ethnic or like religious tensions. And this also is they can also, these elites can double dip as well by um constantly having an inflow of just cheap labor coming in, and this allows the machine to continue churning away because they now have more consumer units to exploit, more cheap labor to exploit, which
Well,
ben- yeah,
yes, that's very astute. Yep.
which this is actually the funny part too. This is something that actually the left used to oppose, and they were correct in doing so. At least the labor left, they opposed a lot of mass migration on labor grounds, because it does when you let your the immigration floodgates open constantly, this eventually puts downward pressure on worker wages, whether it's blue collar to even now
Yes.
white collar labor as well.
Yeah.
And that benefits capital. Like this benefits capital, speculators, people that also a lot of real estate speculators and all that. It's actually an elite driven project through and through. These NGOs and big corporations do that use this. And birthright citizenship, just going back, clamping down on that is very key. I agree with Trump's executive order to roll back birthright citizenship, but my fear is that Republicans are going to actually have to step up and govern and pass like a legislative repeal, because the issue with executive orders is that you can have them go your way, but then if like a really bad administration succeeds Trump, they'll just rescind that stuff. But I still think, like, for example, like the Supreme these federal courts trying to issue injunctions against Trump was totally uncalled for with regards to birthright citizenship.
Right. Well, and just look at the history of this kind of judicial interference. It's been mostly targeted at Trump. No other administration has had to go through as many of these injunctions or objections from activist judges until now. And what you were saying earlier too about this going to a bigger plan. I know that people who are not familiar with or haven't been paying attention to these issues for long uh, start thinking, well, that's just conspiracy theory. But I just pulled up a document, and this has been planned for a long time. The age of globalism and one world government. It's not just a theory. It is a conspiracy. It has
Yes,
been for
it's
a long
it
time, but
is.
it's a theory. There's a distinct difference between theory and reality.
Yeah.
And I there's a document, you can look it up. In fact, I'll probably post a link for it. It's a PDF that you can see for yourself. This is from a preliminary draft of a world constitution in 1948. It's been going on longer than that, but this is where they sort of codified their ideas. And within that draft, there is this should be very telling to people right here. It says that inequity and war inseparably spring from the competitive anarchy of the nation states, and that therefore the age of nations must end and the era of humanity begin. So right there, they're outright saying that they want one world government. And this is why we see the kinds of things that we're seeing now with trying to overwhelm the Western republics and democratic societies with new demographics so that they can control them, change the demographics, erase the borders.
Mhm.
And it's all part of a bigger plan. And it's right there in their documents.
Yes. I've been in these type of alternative, like deep political circles for some time, and you'll naturally get called a conspiracy theorist, but here's the thing: in my years doing this, I use documents, as you mentioned. There's documents out here that are written by think tanks, individuals, and other people that are ultimately become public policy, or they at least try to make them become a political reality. And that's our job as investigators, to be looking at this, because we can't fall for the noise. There's a lot of noise in the media, social media, and everything that distracts us from what's actually happening. I tell people, read the policy papers, read the stuff that the think tanks are coming out. Watch the videos of panels that have like 20 views on YouTube, where you have people like discussing what they're going to do next, because people like to look at the 10 million view shock content that's on YouTube or whatever, but it's the 20 view panel where they're talking about like public policy for the next 20 to 30 years to shape public policy in that time frame. That's actually really important. And I use my stuff based on evidence. I point out that there's a group of people here that are trying to change this type of policy, try to implement a globalist thing. This isn't just me speculating. I'm using documents, panels, testimonies, you name it. And that's the thing too. We have to be prepared to challenge conventional wisdom and get people to realize that there's actually bad people in the political system, and they sometimes actually do telegraph what they're going to do to society, because they really have become so brazen and think that we're so stupid that they can get away with this kind of stuff. And that's why it's important to have like a citizen journalist class that's willing to call this stuff out.
Right. And that's why I applaud your efforts. And Jose, you're doing a great job of getting right to the heart of the matter, and you're documenting it. You're backing it up with evidence, and that's what we need to do. People need to just take a break from Netflix, take a break from whatever escape mechanism you have, and just look at the reality of what's going on, and just accept that the world is not necessarily as you see, or you've been led to believe, as we've grown up to. And there are very bad people in the world. And that's just a reality. It's always been that way, but they are gaining more and more control. And unless we do something about it to stop them and expose this stuff, then they're just going to continue to pursue their agendas.
Yes.
Go ahead.
It's like a Santa Claus is not real moment for a lot of people whenever they start getting into this the really deep facets, because it's not a fault of these people. It's actually the conditioning, because we grew up in an environment where the media, our schools, and even close associates and professional acquaintances are led to believe that we have a system that's run by and for the people, when it's actually could not be further from the truth. And it requires people to actually be able to challenge conventional wisdom and be ready to describe things as they are, not so much as what they were taught like it's supposed to be. And I just stress this enough that people should be doing their research. They should be looking as much content as possible, not solely consuming legacy media or even astroturfed individuals and organizations that look to obfuscate the truth or lead you on blind paths.
Right. And I mean, it's so funny. It seems so obvious to me, but maybe not to the people who haven't looked into these issues. But when you hear like the commentary from, the CNN and other, all the mainstream media, I'll have to find the clip where they're talking about, I can't remember who it was saying, question the media, do your own research. That's dangerous. You don't want to do your own research. You leave it to the experts. And it's like, I can think just as well as anybody else. I can read English. I can read journals and newspapers, and I can read policy papers and, scientific medical studies. Thank you very much. It's so funny. It's like the man behind the green curtain saying, pay no attention to the little man behind the green curtain. It's exposing it all. They're just like, no, sorry, I am going to pay attention to that man, and I'm going to look at what he's doing, and I am going to ask questions.
Yes.
But
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, there was once a time, like in the early days of the Republic, when you actually had an elite that was worthy of the name, and where you could actually probably you could actually like outsource your thinking to them, or at least trust them to govern the country. But we've had a capture by a very hostile elite and just a degradation of the political culture where many people are asking questions. And when you have scores, if not hundreds, if not thousands of people asking questions about what's going on here, you have to start questioning the very experts themselves, because let's face it, governments are run by mortal beings that have the very flaws that we've seen throughout mankind, whether it's greed, avarice, evil, and all that. And does not make you, just because you have like a fancy degree or you hold like public office in DC, does not make you like infallible or some type of demigod. Now it means that like you have to question conventional wisdom and question the very people that lord over us, because when things are going wrong, people have to be held accountable. That's why we have like a republic, at least on paper, because
right.
Yeah.
As opposed to a democracy, that's another thing that people sort of conflate. A pure democracy is not what you want. We need to have, again, the three co-equal branches of government to have checks and balances against a pure democracy. The United States is a republic, and people complain about they would rather have socialism or communism, and they have no idea. In fact, we'll maybe get into a little bit of the problems of that, talking about one of your books later, the problems with socialism. Before we go into that, though, I wanted to talk about your thoughts on the revolt against the post-war order. You were talking about that in one of your podcasts. What does that mean, and what are the implications for us?
Oh, I'm referring to basically the post-war order. I'm referring to the liberal international order that emerged after the end of World War II, which has fundamentally transformed the U.S. Where U.S. After World War II, and especially in the 1960s, the U.S. ruling class undertook a concerted effort to basically erase a lot of like the founding principles and other practices that made like the U.S. unique among nations. And also I'd extend this as well to other Western European countries, because the U.S. has been the primary superpower since World War II. And
Right.
as a result of this, you see this very concerted effort by rulers to erase borders, demographically displace the white European founding stocks of these nations, and also engage in a bunch of perpetual conflicts abroad that create refugee crises and
Right.
add further fuel to the mass migration fire. And as a result of this, you've seen the emergence of populist movements, whether it was George Wallace in the 1960s and 70s to Pat Buchanan and in the 90s, and Ron Paul, and now Trump as well, and also a lot of other lesser known movements. A lot of this stuff is a reaction to this political paradigm we live in, because people
Yes.
are recognizing that it's broken. The system is broken, but the debate is how are we going to fix it? But there is a reaction that's been brewing since the 60s. And what I pointed out in that interview with with Nick of Night Nation Review, is that there have been a lot of dissident movements that have popped up both on the right and the left, and whether it's constitutionalists, nationalists, and other people that have had very valid critiques about the system we have. And even Trump, to an extent, has embodied this as well, because I do see, regardless of whether you agree with Trump or not, I'm not the biggest fan now, but his movement does represent a dissident energy that has been boiling beneath the surface of American politics, because people are recognizing that their towns are getting hollowed out because of the opioid epidemic, the outsourcing of jobs, mass migration, and also never-ending wars. People are tired of this stuff, but they've never had an option at the ballot box to voice those concerns. Trump at least provided the proverbial middle finger to the establishment. I've
Yes.
argued that Trump, in many respects, that the people voting for Trump may not have like agreed with him like wholeheartedly, but they were their vote represented like a big FU to the system. Like they were ready to like burn it down, and he was seen as like the kind of chaos candidate. I think this is going to only continue because I think I've argued this that Trump will look very tame in comparison to what's going to follow him in the decades to come, because I think that we are in experiencing a slow but steady systemic breakdown of the post-world order, and what's going to ensue is going to be quite chaotic.
Yeah, you have to wonder who's going to win. I mean, we are at a very unique time in history, not just in I don't see this just in my own life, but in history.
No.
And I know I think every generation sort of thinks that they have this sort of historical hubris where they think, all those crazy events of the past, World War II and all that, that's the dustbin of history. Certainly not now in my lifetime, but I think we're seeing even bigger things than that coming just in this and the next generation. And I love the way you said it. Yeah, Trump is the proverbial middle finger. Like the left can't comprehend how America could have voted. Well, I think they probably think he stole the election, but in reality, it took such an overwhelming landslide of votes for him that they couldn't cheat him out of office this time around. But I do see him as a symptom of the discontent with the country, because as we were talking about before, I think Rand Paul would be the brilliant statesman. He's even tempered, very common sense, and he would do what's best for all of America, the left included. I don't think they appreciate that, just because he's not a pro radical leftist agenda. But we would all be much better under that kind of leadership. But the system as it exists right now just will not allow it. And it takes a firebrand, somebody who's louder than life to break through all that chaos, and somebody who knows how to sort of troll the media, as he's had that experience to do. Because I think he is doing a lot of good things. He's got a pro-America agenda in general, but it is that kind of personality that is what it has taken to break through all the noise and push forward this populist agenda.
Yes. One thing to note too about the Trump movement that I think isn't really appreciated enough, because I come from more of an analytical, like demographic analysis background, and I look at politics. And I'm more of I'd say now kind of like a non-denominational type of like nationalist, but if you look at Trump's base, especially with the gains he made in the Midwest and the Rust Belt, he was actually picking up a good deal of ancestral Democrats, like former people that routinely voted for Democrats or were part of unions. They're not your typical Republican demographic that has dominated Republican politics for years. He brought in like a new coalition. And I think this is why I say there is a system breakdown, because the previous system just gave you the illusion of two parties. One, like Republicans being like the type of pro-corporate neoconservative party. And then you had like Democrats being like the neoliberal, cultural leftist, and even pro-corporate party themselves too. And it's basically a uni party. You get like one different brand of establishment politics on the surface, but on the substance, it's pretty much like more or less the same. And Trump kind of was in many respects a third party victory, if you think about it, because the main issues that he ran on,
I agree,
immigration restriction, protectionism, and immigration, and ending the forever wars. Those are the three pillars of the so-called liberal international neoliberal order that has dominated the U.S. since 1945. And he in many ways, in a ham-fisted way, revolted against that. That's why the elites generally hate him and his movement, because I believe his movement is even more radical than he is. And yes, it's correct to see him as a symptom, but I think he is in many respects a transitional figure to, I think, what is going to be a very interesting period in American political history as new coalitions form and new actors get into the political arena and try to shake up the consensus.
Yeah, and you talk about the political pendulum. It has gone so far left. The left should not be surprised. And we've talked about the Overton window, how it gets more and more normalized as you push more extremely to the one direction or the other, and then the center becomes what used to be extreme. But so do you feel that the political pendulum is swinging back to the right, or what used to be centrist or normal, and you think it's pushing past that? Could you see like an extreme push to the opposite side of something like a Handmaid's Tale sort of scenario, or what do you see?
So this is probably one of my more controversial takes. I think left versus right, the dichotomy is now somewhat outdated, because I think it is like a post French Revolution concept that held pretty well until the emergence of globalism. And I think the better dichotomy is globalist versus nationalist. Now,
Okay.
because what we see now, uh, there's a good deal of people in the dissident space that come from very diverse backgrounds, ideological, racial, or whatever. People that were used to be on the quote unquote like labor left, starting to become strange bedfellows of people on the right. And what we're seeing is I think a new type of politics where people are going to be fighting for obviously liberty, because I still think the globalist versus nationalist dichotomy, nationalists are going to believe in traditional liberties, because that's part of like your country's traditions, like the US, the
Yeah.
Bill of Rights. The first step to becoming a globalist entity is the erosion of those liberties. That's why the so-called forces of evil, they want to destroy that kind of stuff. And
Yes.
the politics we're seeing is starting to become more to like defined by those lines of people that believe like in traditional freedoms, traditional values, and those that believe in globalist values and degeneracy. Because we were talking about transgender stuff. Transgenderism is part and parcel of globalism, because you have these
Yeah.
really this weird choose your own adventure mindset that people have with regards to basic
Yeah.
biology
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
destroyed sexual and gender norms. That's like that's going towards a kind of like dystopia that you see like in a cyberpunk type of movie or something like that.
Yes.
And that's going to be like the defining lines, whether like people believe in the ideas of like gender, biological reality, race, and all of that. That's these are going to be the fault lines here. And that's why I tell people that it is like a classic also ruling class versus the people type of struggle as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the way you put that. And you talk about a different dichotomy, and it it forces you to sort of pull back away again, yet one more level, and break away from this left right paradigm. I'm much more comfortable with a globalist versus nationalist paradigm, because I think that's what's at stake for us, the stakeholders, the people who love liberty and freedom, and the people who don't, who enjoy liberties and freedoms, and don't realize that they're fighting for the other team when they're jumping onto this leftist bandwagon. They're actually playing right into the hands of these globalists who want to erase all borders, erase any sense of
Yeah.
nationalism, and have this one world government. And make no mistake, folks, there is no good argument for your freedoms and liberty when you're looking at globalism. You are looking at the loss of all your individual rights and freedoms. You better get that into your head, if nothing else. It's the same. It's sort of like a, a macro version of communism, of the worst kind, in my opinion. Yeah, that's new dichotomy. That might be a good title for this podcast, a new dichotomy. So that sort of leads into another topic that you have podcasted about, cognitive pollution and the war on truth, which is how they get these agendas across right under our noses without the general population realizing what's going on in the bigger picture. Can you talk about that, cognitive pollution and the war on truth?
So this is going to go back to the point about conspiracy theories and why a lot of people tend to be sometimes like hostile to the idea of a conspiracy theory. When you get into the space, you'll see a host of creators and organizations putting out certain theories to explain what's going on. And as someone that's like an investigative journalist that writes about the stuff, it's kind of like your duty to kind of look through the facts and the fiction to see what's right and what's wrong and what could actually be disinformation. Because there has emerged a lot of stuff that's called like cognitive infiltration. This is a concept that was actually written about in a paper by Cass Sunstein and Adrian Vermeule, I believe almost 15 years ago, where people, government and nonprofit government actors would infiltrate conspiracy circles, or at least like prop up figures or put figures forward that become prominent in these circles. And then they start putting out theories that sound good on paper, but actually are actually filled with misinformation that are meant to distract you, mislead you, and put you on on a fool's errand, make you go on fool's errand, while the elites continue to get away with stuff. And you can see to show examples of this. A lot of UFO talk, reptilian conspiracy talk and stuff that's like very wacky. I was in the 9/11 Truth movement at one point, and you saw this a lot too. People talking about like known plane theories, like space lasers, doing this kind of stuff. There's some theories that are more plausible too, that sound more plausible, but like what I'm getting at is there is an elite strategy to flood the zone of like the content sphere with figures or at least perspectives that put out literal disinformation, stuff that might be 90% right, but then there's like that 10% of disinformation that ultimately derails like the message, or at least gets people into these wild goose chases. And that's what that episode was mostly about, because elites know in the US that hard tyrannical power has limits. So they have to like get clever and find ways to polarize people, or at least depoliticize people, so that they're like rendered ineffective in opposing their schemes. And one way they do that is through cognitive infiltration and cognitive pollution.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Another example that came to mind while you're talking is the whole Q movement, QAnon.
Yes.
It was taken over. I think there may have been some legitimate intel in the very beginning, but it was quickly infiltrated and corrupted.
Mm-hmm. I would not be surprised if that whole thing may have been some type of op from the start.
Maybe,
because
yeah.
Those type of things, that's the thing. A good like disinformation operation, it's like a con, if you will. Like, people forget this whenever they talk about con man. It's about confidence, man. Like, the source has to build confidence and trust with the audience at first. So they'll give you 90% of the right things, but then like once they have you hooked in, that's when the 10% disinformation comes in, and then you get cognitively polluted, or you're sent off in some wild goose chase while elites continue going on with their business and screwing over the population. And that's why it's very important why the so-called fourth estate, like the independent journalist class, they have to act as a check against this stuff, because we're facing new battles now. It's not it's no longer like conventional tyranny, but it's also subversive operations from people, whether it's QAnon or a lot of stuff you see in social media. You have to have the right type of pundits and people that are handling their business to smoke out those type of attempts to blind us from the truth.
And another thing that you had me thinking about too is seemingly innocent or quirky little things that may happen if you are part of movement. I'm going back to COVID-19 now, back in 2022, I think, when people were getting really frustrated here in New Zealand, because we really bore the brunt of the globalist agenda in a big time under Jacinda Ardern. And the backlash was one of the movements that came out. It was VFF, Voices for Freedom, and they have done a great job of at least bringing groups of people together, even if they're still not on board with the bigger organization itself. And they still continue to speak out against government tyranny. But one of the great things they did was a lot of community organizing in a good way, not in a Barack Obama way. Bringing groups of people together to support each other, do things like barter. We were literally like for over a year, my kids and I could not go to theaters, grocery stores without either an injection passport or a mask on your face. And it was so ludicrous. It was so obvious too that they're pushing agendas that are non-scientific. But it was all, again, about the control. But my point is that these small groups that we were getting into, these neighborhood groups, these kinds of groups are going to always inevitably attract, sort of fringe people. And there are some, people with crazy ideas of, flat earthers and people questioning the moon landings, that I don't even bother, going into that stuff, especially with the flat earth. I mean, it's provably round, but you also get these people talking about, like you said, lizard people and aliens living among us. And while you were saying that, I was thinking, we did have, I remember a guy bringing it up in the middle. They're like, let's talk about all the theories we think about what's going on with the vaccine passports and, the government agenda and stuff. And this one guy is talking about, well, I've seen lizard people, and he's like going into great detail about how he really saw somebody like transform in front of him. And I was like, A, I respect you as a person, but that's just really irrelevant to what we're talking about. And B, are you maybe somebody who's in here to sort of pollute our group and make the rest of us look crazy? And it could be, I mean, why the government themselves are not going to employ one person to go infiltrate, each little group, but there could be those people out there. And I only bring it up for people in these smaller groups, these community groups that are, prepping groups and stuff. Be aware of that kind of thing infiltrating your group, even in a small group.
Yes, this is a classic COINTELPRO tactic, and this stuff has its origins decades ago. It's not necessarily government now, because it's gotten more sophisticated. You could have like private entities or NGOs where they will send like a person or two. The typical tactic they'll do is they'll get this person or a group of people in an organization. They'll start either putting forward wacky theories, and moreover, they'll start generating drama in your group. They'll start that's where I think it gets where I'd watch out more. The wacky theory in of itself, it's innocuous if that person doesn't really create like a huge debate that splinters the group or does anything divisive that discredits the group. It's whenever this person starts to actually create drama inside the organization, create division, and even achieve like a sense of authority in the group and starts diverting the group from its like original mission, that's when you
Yes.
know you've been infiltrated. But I've been in these circles before and I've seen groups fall apart because of this internal drama, which I believe, and I've talked to numerous people across the political spectrum, because COINTELPRO tactics have been used for all sorts of organizations from the right to the left to disrupt them. And it's a way of stifling dissent without using the government's boot directly stepping on your neck. But
Yes.
it
Yeah.
still creates the same end result of like defanging the opposition. The person you mentioned may have been like a really good person, and if that person wasn't causing any drama from that, it's just like a person who has wacky beliefs. Everybody's got
Right.
quirks. But if that person was actually creating drama in your organization and was actually like achieving like a position of prominence, and was doing a lot of other just socially unacceptable stuff, you probably have a disruptor amongst your ranks. That's why for these small for organizations big and small, you have to kind of vet the people and see like what their strengths and weaknesses are,
Yeah.
and if they're actually
Yeah.
like also if they're like up to like weird stuff. Because when you're in the political game, you have to be always careful about the company you keep, because you never know what's going on in the organization, or what they could what some people could do to your group.
Right. Right. So just a word to the wise, and as I learn and mature and learn new things, these are the kind of things that I might not have even considered. We're just trying to, do something that maintains our sense of independence. But anything that may oppose the government narrative, you have to keep an eye out for those kinds of things. So yeah, really good points. And Jose, I wanted to also talk about you. You are a published author. You've written a couple books, and one of them was How Socialism Destroyed Venezuela. And that gives us a real, boots on the ground, rubber hits the road sort of example in reality, how socialism is, not the right path for those people who are inclined that way. Can you talk about your book?
Yeah, I'm originally from Venezuela, and I've studied the political system there for some time. And basically, the book details from a historical perspective, starting in the late 60s, how the country pursued numerous policies, from mass inflation of its currency to confiscation of private property of some form, that has led to like its eventual collapse in the early 20th century, 21st century, I meant to say. And I take a very like empirical driven approach to showing the legislative or government actions, and also looking at the overarching trends that led to its collapse, because a lot of these collapses don't happen overnight. And that's very important, because in our current battles is that the erosions of our liberties don't happen overnight. We have to be looking at trends and the type of patterns of movements that have occurred over time to see where things are going, because that's how we're able to be prepared for whatever the ruling class or other bad actors have in store for us. And this
Yeah.
book is just like a historical account, because I come from a history background. That's what I majored in. And I just gave people a less than 100-page breakdown of what led to Venezuela's collapse.
Were there any signs in social circles, or did you see any like changes of the general morality or social behavior that would be sort of red flags? I'm alluding to kind of what we see in the U.S. right now. Did you see any of that?
Well, in Venezuela in the 90s, that's when my family left, unlike a lot of Venezuelans who've left more recently in the last decade. The collapse of the political system in the 90s was, in my opinion, when you look back, like hindsight's 2020, obviously, was the first sign that Venezuela was going downhill, because they had two failed coup attempts in the 90s. And then triple digit inflation ensued in the late 90s. And that actually caused my dad's small business to operations just shut down. So my parents decided to leave the country before things got even worse. And they proved to be um very prescient in their decision to leave the country because things only
Yeah.
got worse after Hugo Chavez got elected in '98. But things were already going in a bad direction before Chavez entered the picture. And I tell people this because it's very important to realize that a lot of these type of collapses, like they take time. It's not something that's going to be like a dystopian movie where you wake up the next day and there's like a whole hellscape in front of you. It's something that's part of a process, and that's why I've always saluted like the prepper movement, these prepper movements, because people think they're crazy, but a lot of these people are very farsighted when they talk about knowing where to get your food and a lot of basics for like emergency preparedness, because you never know what's going to happen. And
Right.
as the U.S.'s social fabric just continues deteriorating and stuff like that, it's really important to have these type of communities and knowledge at your disposal, because you never know when you're going to need it. And I also come from like a Boy Scout background, so you always
Oh,
want to
you
be
too.
prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Same. Yeah.
yep.
I thank God for that. Yeah, from early, I think I was maybe 8 years old when I joined the Cub Scouts as a kid, and their motto was "Be prepared,"
Prepared. Yes.
and that's what it was. All about. Be prepared. Learn how to survive out in the woods, camping, and fun stuff. Stuff that kids should be doing anyway. But definitely getting you on the right mindset. So yeah, good on you. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about that we haven't brought up? Maybe about the current intifada that's been issued by the mullahs. That's a little bit concerning in Iran.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I tend to be of the opinion that like US needs to really exit the Middle East, and at the same time it also needs to restrict immigration, because
Yeah,
when you have a hyper interventionist foreign policy, you're going to create a lot of enemies. And when you import a ton of people from the third world, there's probably going to be a pretty good deal of people that are like radical Islamists and other troublemakers that could get really activated. That's why like I describe the current order we have also more informally as invade the world, invite the world. And
yeah,
that's the huge that's like the risk that you run when you have a global consumer imperium, in that you create a lot of enemies abroad and then you import a lot of these people um to your country, and you don't know like how many bad apples there are. And yeah, things
yeah.
could get could really take off. I'm not sure um about what'll happen there, but there's all you always run the risk of that, and that's also part of the plan too. Because if something does take off, like some type of false flag event or terrorist event, that's always going to be used to justify crackdowns on liberties. Because when you have a multicultural, multiracial society that's in constant state of tension, the biggest beneficiaries, apart from corporations, are also surveillance corporations, because politicians will instantly say when a terrorist incident happens, hey, you need to turn over your liberties to some government entity or corporation to like basically monitor your every step. And that's how you get the creation of like a panopticon that just
You're
watches
right.
your every move.
Right. Well, just what we saw again, the conversations keep coming back to 1984, the visit screens in every home. But rather than a monitor on the wall in your house, you're carrying your Visi screen with you, which you paid for, which is constantly being
Yeah.
monitored. A lot more than people realize. Your little
Yes.
handheld devices.
Oh, it's creepy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, we could literally have this conversation talking about 1984, and then I could go on Instagram, and the first thing that pops up is something about 1984. That's how
Yeah.
like or like any part of like the computer when you go on like there's surveillance capitalism is thoroughly embedded in the system. That's part of globalism too, because the way
Yes. Yeah.
they're gonna maintain control over the population is through mass surveillance and through the power of suggestion, because all this stuff is generally governed by like algorithms that have like almost like this really creepy predictive power in terms of just nudging you to buy stuff. Like that's why you get all these like tailored ads and all that. They
Yeah.
have your basic behavioral patterns online down pat, and it's very creepy stuff.
Yeah. That would actually be a really good topic for another interview if you'd like to, at a future point, Jose, come on and talk about the
Sure.
surveillance state. I think it would be a good eye opener for a lot of folks. So how can people follow your work better and learn more about you and what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at X/Twitter at Jose Al Nino. That's where you can get my basic political takes. And then you can follow me on Substack at Jose Niño Unfiltered, josbcf.substack.com. I have my podcast there, El Nino Speaks, which you can subscribe to also on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple.
Excellent. Excellent. I'll put those links for you folks under the show notes for this episode at libertynow.com. So make sure you go and check that out. Follow Mr. Nino's work. I really appreciate your insight and really prescient with what's been going on in the world right now. So thank you very much for your time. And
Thank you.
folks, until next time, be good, do the right thing, and keep asking questions. Take care.